foreign movies or about somebody who's lost his identity, but what normally happens, or Mementos, another book where the guy can't remember who he is from day to day. The normal trope is that the character pursues their identity. They're in search of who they were. And so I just reversed that and said, he doesn't want to know his prior identity. In that first chapter, he sort of imagines being given his own biography and kind of dropping it out the window.
Welcome back to the Big Book Project. I'm your host, Lori Feathers, and today I'm so very pleased to have with us writer Jim Gauer, and he's here to talk to us about his novel Explosives, which is just having a reissue after 10 years in print by the wonderful publisher Zero Gram Press. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you, Lori. Appreciate that. Yeah, it's great to be here, and I have watched many of your episodes and hope I don't blow it completely here, but please go ahead.
How does it feel 10 years later? Does it feel like it's been longer than that since you published this book, or?
Yeah, I mean, like a lifetime ago. I mean, I did a number of interviews, Silverblatt show and some other Matt Booker show, and but all of that stopped in 2017, and I haven't done anything to. Frankly, the book sold far better when I stopped doing interviews. So I maybe shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, maybe we'll curse you on the book.
Yeah, exactly. But in any case, yeah, it sort of feels like somebody else wrote the book, but that's a whole phenomena that has to do with writing in general. I mean, I don't know, maybe other authors feel like they actually wrote their own books. I think books kind of write themselves in some sense, and you just have to get out of their way. But anyway.
Well, let's dig into what's so special about this book, and I love it. And it's quite fitting for the Big Book Project because it's a 700-page novel, and it's got loads of ideas that I want to talk to you about. But I guess we should start with the opening. A guy wakes up in Mexico, and he doesn't know who he is. He doesn't have memories. And much of the novel is this exploration of his identity. And maybe just to get us kicked off, because this is a big part of the book, you can tell us about the Portuguese author Pessoa and how your character has, I guess, I don't know whether you would say assumed or seems to have a heteronym that Pessoa himself used for some of his fictional characters.
Yeah, so let me just say, just so it doesn't sound like I knew what I was doing. I had finished my first novel on a Friday, and I was pretty much done with writing. I'd written and published a lot of poetry, and poetry sort of gave up on me in my late 30s, and I wasn't planning to write again. But in any case, I wrote a first novel that was sort of fun, and it's not bad, but I didn't know, I didn't have a clue how to do narrative or description or anything, so I suppose I'd consider it a practice novel. Anyway, I finished that on a Friday, and the next morning I woke up with this sort of voice in my head, and kind of the opening sentences of the book. And so I just wrote those down, and then I don't know, spent maybe a month writing this big blast of prose. I mean, very quickly. Probably, I don't know, 10, 20,000 words, something like that. And I got up to the point where Raymond and Eugene enter the novel, and I sort of sat on my deck and said, am I really going to write this? And I was really curious to know who Raymond and Eugene were. At that point, they didn't even have names. And so I decided, well, if I'm going to figure out who these characters are, I'm going to have to write it. So I went back to the beginning and sort of started over. But so in any case, the setup to the book is that the guy wakes up in Guanajuato, Mexico, with his knowledge intact, but no memory of who he is. So he wakes up without a self. And so, and then I sort of reverse the trope of normally if someone's lost their identity, I mean, the, the Bourne movies are about somebody who's lost his identity, but what normally happens are mementos, another book where the guy can't remember who he is from day to day. The normal trope is that the character pursues their identity. They're in search of who they were. And so I just reversed that and said, he doesn't want to know his prior identity. In that first chapter, he sort of imagines being given his own biography and kind of dropping it out the window. He doesn't want to know anything about his prior narrative. You know, we all form narratives out of our lives. And so my primary interest is, what if you just didn't have a narrative to your life and could just start over and begin again without a narrative? But he does have all of his knowledge intact. So a lot of his exploration is, what did all this knowledge mean? I mean, he knows all this stuff about business and mathematics and poetry and philosophy and crazy stuff. And, you know, what does it actually mean to him is what a lot of that explores. So since Pessoa is kind of the poet of the absence of self, he sort of naturally came into that. And I guess you should know Pessoa in Portuguese just means person. And if ever a poet had a great name, that's a great name for him, because Pessoa had, I mean, he's one of the most complex people in literature, and yet his poetry is quite simple, deceptively simple, I'll put it that way. So, in any case, someone in theory has kind of planted an identity on him. He has a Scottish driver's license in the name of Alvaro de Campos. Campos was, there were various incarnations of the Campos heteronym. He started out as a sort of futurist like Marionetti, and later became far closer to Pessoa's own personality, I would say, if he had one. And so in any case, he's been kind of planted with a driver's license and an ATM card and various other things, just the minimal tools to get started in Guanajuato. My interest in Pessoa started long ago. I lived in Portugal for a year doing translations of Pessoa with a bunch of Portuguese friends of mine that I knew from Paris. And that's a long story. I lived in Paris on and off for 15 years. And so I had done quite a lot of translation of Pessoa's poetry. And unfortunately, the translations we get are not very good. I'll sort of spare you the critique of that, but nearly all the translations are come from Richard Zenith. I mean, I could give you some examples of really bad translation. Let me just pause there and see how deep you actually want to go into Pessoa, because we could easily do 2 hours just on Pessoa.
Yeah. Well, I do want to talk a little bit more, but maybe later in the program, about not just Pessoa, but also Jose Saramago, who is
Right,
also mentioned a number of times in your novel, and who also wrote himself a novel about a Pessoa heteronym, Ricardo Reis.
right. So
Yeah,
Ricardo Reis,
Reich.
and,
Sorry.
and yeah, I mean, pronounce them in American English or Portuguese. It doesn't matter, right? But yeah, in the Saramago novel, the theory is that Ricardo Reich, who in Pessoa's world had gone off to live in Brazil, comes back because his author has died. Pessoa has died, and so in the Saramago novel, Reich returns because Pessoa himself has died, and it sort of covers the period of about 9 months where, in the rules of Saramago's novel, Pessoa himself is still allowed to come out of his grave and have conversations with Ricardo Reich. So obviously, I mean, I call it hanging a lantern on. I mean, I put the title of the book, and I mean, pretty much everything in the book, I should say, you don't need to know any of these writers or philosophers or anything. Everything you need to read the book is in the book. I mean, I put it in there deliberately because I didn't want people to have to think about allusions or anything else. I wanted them to be present to the book itself. So, in any case, yeah, I sort of explained the connection to the Saramago novel. It is an amazing novel. I think well, Harold Bloom said Saramago was the greatest living writer in 2003, and I think that was true. And I think his two truly great novels are The Year of the Death and The Gospel According to Jesus. That's a kind of incredible act of imagination. So, in any case, yeah, a couple of Portuguese authors that I revere.
So we'll get back to Alvaro. He wakes up, he's in this hotel room. He doesn't know who he is. He befriends a woman who lives next door to him, Gabriela, and he meets up with her because he's got this ATM card and he doesn't know the PIN number. And it seems that Gabriela recognizes and knows Alvaro, and she takes him to her uncle's bank, which is where he can draw on the ATM card. And he's still kind of befuddled, like, how am I gonna get money? I don't know. And it turns out that Alvaro actually has a whole lot of money, and he doesn't know how he got it.
Right, right. Yeah, there's a little joke in that the the original amount was $20 million, and when he gets his when Gabriela's uncle shows him his bank statement, there isn't even 20 million in there, which is one of the things banks do to all of us.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, so, but one of the rules he has to follow is he's not really allowed to use his ATM card because there may be people pursuing him. That's sort of hinted at. And so he starts out with 1,000 pesos, and over the course of the few days that he's actually in Guanajuato, I mean, the entire novel takes place over the course of a week, starts in the early morning hours after Easter in 2009 and ends 1 week later, the day after so-called Divine Mercy Sunday, which is sort of the last day that Alvaro doesn't know who he is. And in any case, yeah, Gabriela is a whole long story. She's central to the book. I mean, she holds all of the narrative strands are connected through Gabriela. And she has, her memory sort of works backwards, like her way of remembering her PIN number is just to take her own memory and then put the numbers in exactly backwards. And that her memory works in reverse, which means she's effectively reversing cause and effect. In order to have cause and effect, you have to remember, oh, this was the cause and then that was the effect. Her memory works exactly backwards, so cause and effect is out the window in Gabriela's way of working in this world that the novel builds.
Yeah, she's got a very ordered memory, but it's very sequential, going the going in
Going in the
backwards.
wrong direction, exactly.
Yeah, right,
She
right.
reverses the way time works.
So the novel then cuts from Alvaro and Gabriela, and we are in the office of this venture capitalist, um, who's in the United States, I believe, and he's referred to as douchebag,
Yeah,
um, and he's I guess struggling to kind of figure out why this deal went belly up that he was working on, a telecom deal. And then there's also chapters where he seems to be writing or trying to write, I guess, his memoir,
his memoir.
or
Right.
writing a book. Um, a douchebag also knows quite a bit about poetry,
Yeah,
and he's sometimes referred to as the poet.
yeah. And thinks of himself as a failed poet, I would say. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So,
One one
go
of
ahead.
the one of the motifs of, I think, your novel that's so intriguing is that he douchebag feels like he doesn't have an inner self anymore. He says he's killed his inner self, and there's a lot of searching for both Alvaro and well, I don't know whether douchebag is actually. He just kind of seems a little bit resigned to the fact that his inner self is gone, he can't deal with poetry anymore, so he just has to deal in this business world, in the world of numbers and finance, and really just kind of pulling the wool over a lot of people's eyes, the people that he works with, and also the people that he's trying to get capital from, to support these ventures. This is obviously something that you uh, know, not that you're a fraudster, but you know this venture capital world.
Right, right. Yeah, I lived in it for decades, and yeah, I had, sort of led two entirely separate lives in parallel. One in sort of philosophy, poetry, fiction. Probably I should put mathematics in that category, and I have advanced degrees in three different subjects. So, but the business was, to me, was just a game that I was good at playing, and my real passions were all had to do with mathematics, philosophy, writing, and all that. So what's happened at Douchebag is comes from my knowledge, and a lot of the stories that he tells as he's trying to write his memoir are stories from my own life and experience. But he's sort of the venture capitalist I would have been if I didn't have an ethical code. Uh, yeah, seriously. I mean, you, you'd be amazed how little people even think about ethics in the venture capital world. I mean, things that you'd find appalling to do to another person, they do with absolutely no remorse. And everything, when I started in venture capital, it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't considered a way to get wealthy. There was only about $500 million in the whole venture capital system. There are now trillions in the system, and it's all about greed. I mean, it's what it was for me was I loved starting companies, and a lot of the companies I started were sort of my own ideas. I mean, Rick Moody has a line in one of his novels that says venture capitalists used to be poets. And yeah, I mean, I literally was a poet. So, but it was the sort of creative work I could do when I couldn't write anymore. And I love starting companies and helping them get going. And, but I had this really strict ethical code, which is I never worked on making my own money. My responsibility was to investors in the companies. And yeah, I mean, so Douchebag is sort of the character. He has the sort of money. I mean, he's got to be worth in the billions if $20 million, like a rounding error to him. He just throws it in a bag. He doesn't even throws it in the trunk of a car and doesn't even lock his car. It's so, yeah, $20 million is a rounding error to a lot of these guys that got truly wealthy. But I mean, I just give you an example. There's no VC of my stature. I mean, I have one of the top 20 track records, just in terms of the multiple on capital invested. But there's none of them pay any taxes. I had this tax attorney from Deloitte who it drove her completely crazy. Jim, you don't have to pay any taxes, right? And I'm like, yeah. So what, Karen? Well, I just figured out last night that you pay more taxes per dollar earned than anyone in the United States. Now, I'm sure that's not true, but it gives you a sense of how angry she was that I wasn't taking advantage of the fact that you can just park all your money offshore. allow it to continue making money offshore and never pay any taxes. I mean, your offshore company can buy your jets and your yachts and all your houses and all that, and there are a pile of people. I mean, the wealth disparity in our country is insane, and yeah, I don't want to go off on a rant about that, but if you made me God for like a tenth of a second, I'd just get rid of greed and we'd solve a lot of our problems. But in any case, let's just say that douchebag got his name because that's sort of what I consider him. So anyway, yeah. So he has a dead self, and Alvaro is missing a self, and somehow the two of them are going to have to come back together. That's kind of the course the novel's going to follow. Uh, so I'll pause there.
So you mentioned Raymond or Ray and Eugene, and they work for a guy named Gomez. Gomez is a rather nasty character, and someone has stolen Gomez's money. He's a corrupt kind of uh, Mexican drug lord kind of guy, I think, and um, so they are tasked by Gomez to go out and find this money, and they believe that the code name for the guy that they're looking for is the poet, which is also a term or a name that douchebag
Right.
is uses or is called. So there's a little bit of a, I don't know, a caper kind of aspect to the novel, this chase going on. But I was really intrigued by this metaphor that you use when talking about the VC deals that douchebag works on, and also the the uh, vehicle, the pickup truck that Gomez presumably hid his money, but now it's gone. Is I think that's the way it works. So there's this. I think you call it the Louis Vuitton. What is it called in the novel? I'm not finding it right now. It's the false bottom luggage, right? The Louis Vuitton
Right.
false bottom luggage, and there's this whole kind of philosophical discussion about from the exterior, it's bigger on the interior than it is on the exterior. And same way with this secret compartment that's
Right.
in Raymond's pickup truck. And I thought it was really a clever kind of physical space to make us think about the identities of these people and what's on the inside of them, and being dead inside, or as Alvaro has, he's got a vitality about him.
Yeah. So yeah, that false bottom luggage story has to do with an actual character, Crazy Eddie, who ran, uh, I guess you'd call them consumer electronics store, chain stores. And
I remember
Crazy
the
Eddie,
ads.
yeah, exactly. So if you remember those ads, he was actually did what's called a pump and dump scheme, where he was building up the value of the company by smuggling money using that luggage first into Israel and then wiring it out from Israel into Panama and then into the Caymans and then using it to buy stock in his own company and also to buy goods from the company to so the sort of way that the company that the poet has invested in, the way that scheme works is is similar to what happened in the real world with the pumping up the stock of Crazy Eddie, and he eventually got busted for it. But in any case, Gomez is kind of a master with money, and he's set up this offshore, sort of like a hedge fund that invests in the deal that the poets invested in. And the poet can't figure out what the hell happened to this company. It was growing like crazy, and all of a sudden, all the orders stopped. Well, it turned out all the orders were phony, and, getting orders from Paramaribo, Suriname, and Tonga, and all over the place. I mean, that is accurate to the actual technology, which is called WiMAX. It was kind of a bridge to the fourth generation of cell phone equipment. And that actually is based on a real company that wanted me to invest in them, but their lawyer and chief financial officer was from China, and he wanted to. The company was incorporated in the Cayman Islands, and they said it was because they were going to take the company public on the Hong Kong exchange. Eventually, there were a bunch of VCs that invested in that, and the Chinese guy just took all the money and left and went back to China. So it's actually based on a real deal. One of my CEOs, a good friend, Jim Green, read the novel, and he said, I'm still having nightmares about that novel. Like, how would you know that money that's invested in your company, that's also being used to buy your product, is coming from a drug cartel, which is what Gomez works for? And yeah, you wouldn't know. But that whole money laundering scheme was kind of my own invention. Well, I read a pile of books about money laundering and how it works. And anyway, it was sort of a interesting device for me to concoct, and it would work. I mean, I can tell you from real world experience that there's no way the investors in a company would know that hedge fund money. You're supposed to know where all the money comes from. You can't possibly know where it comes from. So that whole scheme actually would work in the real world, which is why it scared one of our CEOs. Like, I couldn't possibly have known that that was what was happening. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, you could have been making the whole thing up, and it could have been a fantasy, and I wouldn't have
Yeah.
known any better. But
Yeah. Well, I mean, you do sort of. I mean, it is explained in the book, at least well enough that you can sort of see what's happened. But basically, the poet Douchebag has profited from the deal. And Gomez, because he's cashed out his stock, and Gomez just wants his money back. Whatever. He doesn't think Douchebag should have profited at all. And so, he just starts kind of mysteriously calling him, and Gabriela, who happens to be his secretary, is also calling him and telling him he's going to have to bring the money back. So eventually, he's so thoroughly bored with his own life that he just decides to pack a duffel bag full of what turns out to be Swiss currency, which is an actual calculation I did, by the way. It was everything is packed with Swiss Burkhards. That's 1,000 Swiss franc notes. That is the lightest way you could possibly carry $20 million. I did all of the calculations in different currencies, and you may recall his financial advisors doing all the calculations in real time while they're on the phone. And, he does it in silver and the guy tells him, well, that'd be 6 tons of silver. And Douchebag says, this, while fascinating, isn't getting us anywhere. I'm not boarding a plane with 6 tons of silver. And anyway, I do think objectively that the book is truly laugh out loud funny in
It
places.
is. It
Yeah,
is.
it can be sort of more menacing and terrifying in other places, but it is quite funny in places. So
So, um, Gomez is kind of a clock freak.
yeah,
And time plays a big role in the book. I mean, you talked about the book takes place all 700 pages pretty much in 1 week in 2009 in the spring. Um, and then we have Gabriela, who her memory can't really, in order to think way back, she's got to kind of go through everything that happened from her present time until that in like sequential, reverse sequential order. um, but talk maybe a little bit about, like, especially there's this clock that's in Gomez's, I don't know, one of his safe houses or something that he's using to do nefarious stuff. And it's got a clock with two birds that are kind of facing opposite ways. I think you say something like forward in the way that all time travels, but then backward to the past and regrets. And one of the characters in the book that I felt the most empathy for is Raymond. He kind of uh, he feels like someone that's really struggling, even though he works for this horrible man Gomez, to kind of he he in some ways has a deeper inner self than you would ever imagine someone that
uh,
is doing the work he does would have.
right. So let me just say one word about the clocks. And I mean, there are clocks all over the book, including the narrator's atomic clock for when he's going to run out of narrative time. All that stuff about time has to do with Proust. I mean, Proust has more ways of looking at time in La Recherche than any other novel or set of novels I can think of. And so all of that was sort of my intent to outdo Proust. How many different ways can we find of looking at time and thinking about time? So all of those clocks and various things having to do with time are really my having Proust. And I mean, I've been through the books many times, and it's just like, if I do one thing in this book, I'm going to have more ways of looking at time than Proust did. So whether I actually did that or not, I don't know. But in any case, Raymond, um, since Raymond was a character I didn't know anything about. I mean, he served in the first Gulf War. He was an artillery forward spotter. That's the person who sits closest to the battlefield and communicates back to the artillery guys when and where uh, they're supposed to fire things. Actually, he doesn't time when things are fired. He gives the coordinates. And then he comes back he was an orphan from the time he was 14. He comes back from the first Gulf War with no knowledge of anything other than weaponry, really, and has to try to find a way to make his way in the world. And so, he starts off ripping off drug dealers and decides that's not a good way to do things, and ends up working for Gomez. Um, And since Raymond had, served in the military and I never did, and the military way of thinking about things and the military way of standing in the world, I think is the way I would put it, sort of fascinated me. So that's the character I had to work hardest on to really understand. And the character is really important to me. I mean, I feel like he's still sort of with me. One of the interviews I did for a Chicago radio station, I had this terrifying moment where the guy asked a question about, so what branch of the military did you serve in? And I just said, why do you ask? He said, well, I was an artillery spotter. I thought, oh my God, he's going to have found every mistake I could possibly have made about artillery spotting and all of that. And now it turned out Jeremy was convinced I actually served in the military. And anyway, I just said, I have enormous respect for people who've served, but I'm from the Vietnam War era, and there was no way I was going to Vietnam. So, in any case, um, yeah, Raymond was probably the most important character for me to get right because he goes through a sort of transformation from someone he's done bad things in the past. We know he's, accidentally shot someone. I mean, accidentally or not, he has killed someone. But, frankly, he's living in the drug wars and he doesn't think of it as all that different from living in real world wars. I mean, when I actually visited Juarez to get, I mean, every location in the book is a place I've been to, and including I went to Grainfield, Kansas, which is where Eugene comes from, because I had to see it. All of the locations in the book I've been to. I needed to create some sense of authenticity. I had to feel like I'd been there. So the Death House, which is in the Cuernavaca subdivision of Juarez, I actually went there and it was, yeah, it was kind of ominous. There wasn't a single person on the street, there wasn't a single car. I'd been told before I went into Juarez not to stop at any stoplights. There were 50,000 Mexican army troops there. So, it really was a war zone. So for Raymond, he's in yet another war, I would say, and sort of the rules of war apply to him. But what he's looking for is humanity, I would say, and and he does meet a woman who's there's no real love story there other than there certainly would have been if Raymond had gone forward. I won't say too much more about that, but when he meets Jennifer, it begins to become clear to him that he's somewhere along the way sort of lost his humanity. He's a person of the next indicated action. That is the military code. Whatever is the next action you have to take it without pausing. And there isn't a lot of humanity in the next indicated action. It's just whatever you have to do to survive. And so Raymond is both that way and over the course of the book, hopefully becoming an actual human for the reader.
Yeah, well, I wondered, speaking of Juarez, there's Alvaro gets a FedEx package, and it's got various clippings in it from the El Paso newspaper, and they're about the femicides
Right.
in Juarez. And uh, you make reference, not like adjacent to this, but there is reference to Jose Saramago's novel Blindness, and
Right.
about the doctor's wife, and that the doctor's wife in Blindness is the only one that can really see the contagion
Right.
that's making everyone blind. And I could be reading way too much into this, Jim, but I kind of thought that Raymond might be the character that was like the doctor's wife, that
Absolutely.
he can see the contagion, that exists with these drugs and these femicides and all of this corruption and violence. um, Even though he's a military guy and used to following orders, he can see the contagion.
Perfect. Perfect. I don't have to say a word about that. You nailed it. Nobody's ever made that connection. I mean, but that's, yeah, I guess that's why people like to talk to you. You can make those kind of connections without being aided. Yes, he is the one who begins to see what's really going on here. And I mean, I probably read 100 books in the course of writing the book. I didn't stop writing for a single day for 7 years. I mean, nearly the entire novel is written between the hours of 3:30 a.m. and around 8:30 a.m. in the morning because I had a full-time job. And so I worked, I didn't skip a day in 7 years despite traveling. I wrote constantly. Part of that was because I had like the entire structure of the book in my head. I didn't want to know anything about what was I was going to write. I wanted the writing to be a surprise to me so that it would be a surprise to the reader. Yeah, I read novels all the time that feel like they've been pre-planned, and you kind of I think if the writer doesn't surprise themselves with the writing, it's not going to surprise the reader. I love books that surprise us. So, in any case, the yeah, I mean, the book is full of those kinds of connections. I mean, a lot of people have written to me said that they were surprised at how quickly they were able to read the book, and I think that's great. I think it's relatively easy to read. It has a huge lexicon, but you don't really need to know the meanings of. There's literally no literary language in it, meaning those kind of words you see only in novels and on SAT tests, where you really have to know the precise meaning of the word, or you're not going to understand the sentence. There's none of that. I mean, and part of that is because I didn't write the novel to be published. I wrote it to entertain an old friend of mine who was a great writing teacher named Howard Stein, who was slowly dying of pulmonary issues. And the last thing I wanted was Howard to have to use a dictionary. So I had to figure out how to write the sentences in a way so he wouldn't have to use a dictionary. But in any case, yeah, I mean, I think the book, I was sort of joking. I was tempted to put two copies back to back so you could just pause at the end and then just start over, knowing now everything you've got and seeing it's pretty carefully patterned. I mean, it's pretty much all of the threads lead to other threads. I mean, it was an enormous amount of work. I'll just put it that way. I mean,
Yeah.
I was pretty much willing to die for the book. I mean, I was very sick during parts of writing it. I had blackout migraines. Uh, I lost like 30 pounds. I'm about 6'1". I was maybe down to 120 pounds. And my wife told me after if I didn't finish the book in the seventh year, she was going to do some kind of intervention so I didn't literally die. I didn't
Oh,
I didn't think of it that way. I was just totally immersed in, and I mean, I wake up in the middle of the night with the solution to some kind of writing problem and just go write it. And yeah, it was so that if it sound when your original question, does it seem like a lifetime ago I wrote it? Yeah, I barely remember the character who wrote it. I mean, I'm not normally that obsessive, but I was completely obsessed. So anyway, which I told myself I was never going to do again after writing poetry, because when poetry gave up on me, it was horrible. I mean, it was worse than heroin withdrawal. It took me like 2 years before I could even listen to music or anything creative. All I could read was nonfiction. And uh, yeah, it was truly awful. So I promised myself I was never going to get obsessed about writing again. And when I finished novel Explosives, the next day I started a third novel and wrote 4 chapters into it and then said, okay, stop, enough. Or
well,
too much.
um, I think that obsessiveness, and I'm sorry what it did to your physical health, but that obsessiveness uh, comes through, I think, in a really marvelous way with all of the detail. Um, I kind of use term for some books that I call abundant, insofar as there's lots of digressions, lots of descriptions. Some people use the term excess. I think abundant has a little bit more of a positive
I,
connotation than excess, because I love that kind of stuff. And I never think that
yeah,
hold it like in a negative light. But uh, when we were communicating and I was inviting you to come on the show, to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the book, I mentioned to you that I really admired and loved your use of color in the book.
yeah,
And that, again, I think is really symbolic of this vitality of the inner self, of the inner life, that you've got this sensory perception that you're not just like nose to the grindstone on your desk trying to make money, but you're kind of like living an inner life. You're living. I think one of your characters says something about like you can't have an inner life and also live in the world, or that's too stark of a thing. But there's kind of a contrast between that, because we even see Raymond, that really gripping last few chapters with him in it. Um, you know, things are very gray, and you intentionally, obviously, use the word gray over
yeah,
and over and over again to kind of indicate this horrible environment and atmosphere that he's in. But then there's also, he has some flights of fancy where like the colors are so brilliant and vibrant, and that's something that Alvaro has going for him too, in Guanajuato, because he's seeing things and he's seeing the color and everything.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I should say first, I love your term abundance. I mean, I don't like maximalist and encyclopedic and all these things. If you can keep the reader enthralled in a book, which is difficult to do, and whether Novel Explosives does that or not, I don't know. I mean, as long as the book feels alive to the reader and they keep reading, you want them to have as rich an experience as possible. And I mean, we live in a world of color, and it kind of baffles me when I'll read novels that feel like they're written in black and white, and there's very little description. I mean, the description was really important to me, and frankly, since I didn't really know how to do it from writing poetry, I mean, description sort of gets into poetry, but you're not doing, I never wrote narrative poetry. So I went back and read like David Copperfield, I don't know, 6 times to try to see how Dickens did description, and read early Hemingway, Big Two-Hearted River, and Sun Also Rises. And I mean, I think it was actually Gertrude Stein that taught Hemingway how to do description in narrative motion, meaning don't stop the narrative to do a sort of static description. Dickens will do that to open a chapter, but otherwise all the description goes in the narrative flow. And why contemporary US writers don't use description is sort of baffling to me, because I mean, if what I think you want to do as a writer is give the reader a sense of presence to the world depicted. And you have to have color in there. You can't over describe things, because what you want is the reader to be able to form an image in their own mind. If you can leave, 4 or 5 images, if a novel leaves 4 or 5 images imprinted on my memory, I remember the entire book. So it's really important to me that the reader be able to form an image. And if you over detail the description, the the image falls apart. So if you kind of over describe things or over direct the reader on how to form that image, no, you just have to do like a few sketch like things so the reader can form their own image. And if that can stay imprinted in memory, you can kind of remember books better that way. Anyway, it was really important to get color into the book, because color is really part of memory, and it does go gray as Raymond is bleeding internally. He doesn't know that he's bleeding into his lungs, but that whole section of the book on Raymond as he's bleeding and kind of patching him. He's been wounded in a knife fight and has this big X-shaped wound, and it's cut the vagus nerve that is responsible for the cough reflex. And so he's not coughing blood or anything, and he thinks he just has to patch himself up, so he sort of improvises a patch. But that whole section, I originally totally messed it up. I had 2 whole chapters that read fine in isolation, and they were awful when I read it in the flow of the book. And so those had to be ripped out and replaced. And it took me nearly a year to fix that. It had to get back inside Raymond's body and see things through Raymond's perspective as he's both bleeding but fully aware of what he has to do and the indicated actions that are coming next. That was I wasn't exactly sure I could fix the book. I mean, I was living in New York for a couple of months when I discovered I completely messed it up, and I thought the book's just dead. And it was like I had a tunnel dug in one direction, and then I had to dig the tunnel in the other direction and have the 2 parts of the tunnel meet up. And I remember coming out of my study one day and telling Meredith, I got it, I know how the tunnels connect. And it's like, yeah, I can actually finish this. But yeah, it could easily have just totally failed. I mean, seriously, just been dead. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well, if you'll permit me, I want to read just the shortest little passage from the book. I'm not going to tell our listeners where this is in the novel because I don't want to give anything away, but just an example of how exquisitely you use color. This is a scene where Gabriela and Alvaro are walking to a beach to watch the sunset, and you're right. The headlands turned purple, and the sky, streaked with red, went from pale shadows of turquoise to a far deeper blue that slowly grew deeper and turned a bluish shade of black. And then the evening's dark magician, in his black velvet cape, swept a cloth across the heavens and made the stars shine like new. I just love that passage.
Yeah. So if we're not allowed to say where that is in the book, but yeah, that, yeah, I suppose I still have a bit of poet in me. So yeah.
Absolutely, you do. Absolutely, you do. Even though maybe you've fired poetry or it fired you or however it happened, yeah, there's a lot of poetry in this book.
Yeah, that's a Philip Larkin expression, by the way. He said that poetry. Somebody asked him, "Why'd you give up poetry?" He said, "I didn't. It gave up on me." So, what actually happened with the poetry is I made it more and more difficult to write. I sort of stripped out all the ornament. I stripped out all the obvious poetic effects, all of the things that metaphoric language, and then I started stripping out objects, and pretty much I ended up with like language and a self, and I got like 5 poems out of it, but they were so difficult to write that uh, and for whatever reason I couldn't go back to the sense of play that I started out with poetry. And so one of the things in novel explosives is it's just like, the hell with that old way of writing. I'm just going to have a sense of play in this. If nothing else, the book's going to be playful, and I'm going to at least try to enjoy writing it. There are occasions when I did.
Well, I really enjoyed reading it. If that's any consolation, it's a fun book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's cool. That's the best thing anyone could possibly say. If the book is fun to read and is in any way memorable, that's all I care about. You know, there are so many novels being published that it's really hard to find good books these days. I mean, some estimates are, since everybody's now using print on demand to publish novels, something like 250,000 novels were published last year alone. So finding books has become, I don't know, for you, it's become really difficult for me. I mean, pretty much all of my network of friends, their whole purpose in life, as far as I'm concerned, is to find me good books to read. And so, yeah,
Well, I don't know if you know, but I co-own a bookstore in
I
Dallas,
do.
and so, but I hear your lament because um, I feel like there's too many books being published, which is probably a bad thing to say as a bookstore owner. But the problem is that so many of them are the same,
Yeah,
and they feel the same. They feel like they're cut from the same cloth, like they're like riding a trend. And in order to find something that you really want to spend some time with and think
yeah,
about, it's difficult.
yeah. I mean, so we were talking before we started recording about the fact that my house was in the Palisades fire. It didn't burn, but it took us like 10 months to fix up the house. So I didn't, I was out of my house. So I read in the first 100 days after the fire, I bought 60 novels that had all sold well, at least as well as novel explosives. Um, yeah, I know it, I don't know how many copies novel explosives sold because it doesn't matter to me. I know this is it's selling its 12th print run now, so I guess that probably adds up to a lot of copies. But whatever, the books were also had to be associated with prizes, so shortlisted for something or on the long list. So in theory, the best of our literature, all US. I mean, I read a lot of international fiction and translation, and we're really provincial in the US. We don't read a lot of international fiction. It's like, 2% of fiction is fiction and translation, and everybody else in the world reads English language novels in translation, and I don't know why we don't, but anyway. So I read 60 novels, and with one exception, they were all what I would call synopsis novels. Meaning, if you first read the synopsis on the back, you know the whole book. And since I don't read the synopsis, what would happen? I'd get 40 or 50 pages into the book, and it's like, yeah, I feel like I've already read this, and I pretty much know what's going to happen in the rest of the book. And the prose was all very similar, fairly simple prose. I mean, in novel explosives, I love suspended syntax, which is, Proust and reading George Eliot and Middlemarch and Daniel Deronda. There's all these crazy books I've read that just because I love suspended syntax. There wasn't a single book that had any suspended syntax in it. And the prose was also similar that I could barely tell them apart. And but I think there's a reason for this. People live such harried lives, and they're so busy all the time, and that if they're reading for relaxation, they probably just want to know the book in advance. 'Cause the last thing they want is a book that catches them off guard or makes them anxious or whatever. I don't know. It's so there's probably a reason that those sell well, but they're kind of discouraging to read if you think of fiction as an art form. Yeah, I always want to find something that's like, wow, where did that come from? You know, I haven't read anything
Absolutely.
like that. What's that? Where
Yeah.
did that come from? And those are the books I'm looking for. So
Me
just
too.
pack me up a carton full, and I'll
Okay.
give you my credit card. And I mean, I used to get shipments of cartons of books every month from my bookstore in Mount Holyoke called the Odyssey. One of the great bookstores in history. It was owned by this guy, Romeo Grenier. And Patricia, his book buyer, a fiction and poetry buyer, knew more or less what I liked to read. And so they would just ship me a big carton of books every month. A lot of it was poetry and other fiction, but in any case, and they just put it on credit, and because I didn't have much money at the time, and Romeo had read a fair amount of my poetry, and he was willing to just give me the books, and so it was all on credit. I did pay it off, but yeah. So rest assured, I can afford books now. Anyway, but yeah, I used to love getting those cartons of books that I had no idea what was in there. But Patricia was so good at finding, the best, and it was, yeah. I mean, that was 20 years worth of my reading. Other than I spent 20 or 30 years reading philosophy, kind of under the mentorship of Jacques Derrida, which is a whole long story. I first started communicating with Derrida by mail in 1976, and uh, I don't want to say too much about that, but he was really my mentor in philosophy. He didn't, I mean, we would go to lunch and he'd just say, well, what did you read? And I'd tell him what I'd read, and he'd say, okay, you now have to read these three philosophers because that's the natural sequence. And he sort of guided me through the whole foundations of philosophy. And he's a very generous human. And in any case, yeah, so I don't know, reading's just been a lifelong passion of mine. I taught myself to read when I was only at 4, and I've been pretty much reading ever since. So, I was kind of tricked into doing this by Samuel Johnson saying, if you read 5 hours a day, you read everything. Well, that might have been true in 1780, but it certainly isn't true now.
Yes, that's certainly
Yeah.
not true.
But
You know, you get
if you read 5 to 7 hours a day, you know, for a lot of decades, you read plenty of books. So anyway,
yeah, that's true. But you do get to an age where you realize that you're never going to read all the books that you
yeah,
own.
yeah. I mean, I've maybe read, I don't know, 10,000 novels. It would take me 25 lifetimes to read last year's output.
Yep.
That's just not going to happen. So um, anyway,
So
I will have to come to your store when I am in Dallas. I mean, the only times I've been in Dallas, one of the companies that's in the book called Efficient Networks, which is where that big IPO party is
yeah.
thrown at Del Frisco's. I don't know if you remember
Yes,
Del Frisco.
yes. It's still
Was
here.
Yeah, well, I know, but it's owned by a big chain now. But Del herself, like, we were sort of charter members of Del Frisco's, and we ate there, and that actual dinner really happened. I mean, it was uh, we was in the wine cellar, and the waitress just left us with a corkscrew, and we just started uncorking things. And yeah, and the tab really was like $200,000, but the the company went public at $9. At the end of the first day, it was $72. So the bankers made so much money that the 200,000 bucks for a dinner was, minor. So, but
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that's all of my travels to Dallas had to do with investment. So I've never really come to Dallas for enjoyment. So I got to come see your store. Long story
Well,
short.
wait a few months. It's awfully hot
Okay.
here right now.
Yeah. Well, I've never had a. Is the weather ever good in Dallas? It was either hot and muggy, or it was like sleet and rain, or I mean, I nearly crashed on takeoff like 3 times from wind shear, and yeah, Dallas was. I never
I,
saw. I never was there on a single pleasant day, but I'm sure they exist. I just got unlucky for decades.
I recommend coming between October 15th and November 15th. The window's
Oh, okay.
short.
Okay, let me just put that on my calendar right now. We'll get that in there. Go
All
to
right.
Dallas.
I look forward to that. Well,
Yeah.
Jim, thank you so much for joining me today and just talking about this wonderful novel. And we've got a big stack of the 10th anniversary edition with Joy Williams' introduction at our bookstore with my shelf talker on it. So, yeah, I'm just really happy to have had the opportunity um, to introduce people to the book. And I don't know, whether it feels gratifying all over again to have a little bit of recognition 10 years after you completed it, but it
Well,
deserves a 20th anniversary edition as well.
yeah. I mean, so many books die in their first year that it's sort of awful. I can't believe every time a print run was done, I thought, well, that'll be the last of it, and I don't know how it survived, but I I have to say, Lori, I truly appreciate the careful reading. I mean, you're sort of noticing the false bottoms and the connection to blindness and how Raymond is the character that parallels the doctor's wife in Saramago's most famous in English novel. I mean, I had to put one novel of Saramago's in there that people would have actually read, but careful readers like that are really few and far between. I mean, so I truly appreciate that kind of care in reading. So
Well,
my
that's why I
deep
wear
gratitude.
that's why I wear my magnifying glass for careful reading. It's my symbol. So
Yeah,
all right.
my OED is one of those that has a big square. You know, it's one of those 2-volume OEDs that has a big square magnifying glass on it. And yeah, I probably am going to have to use that eventually to read. But
All right. Well, thank you so much, and
thank you.
we'll swap some book recommendations.
Excellent, excellent. I will see you at your store, and thank you so much for today.